From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. We begin with a historic decision for the Caribbean. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has become the smallest country ever to be elected to the United Nations Security Council.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 185 votes. El Salvador, 6 votes. Habiendo obtenido la mayor...
Having obtained the 2/3 majority necessary and the number of votes, Niger, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Tunisia and Vietnam are elected members of the Security Council for a 2-year term beginning on 1st of January 2020.
The island, with a population of just over 110,000, received 185 votes from the ballots cast in the UN General Assembly in New York. Its competitor, El Salvador, received just 6 votes. Under the leadership of Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, St. Vincent and the Grenadines is now set to begin its 2-year tenure following its decade-long campaign for non-permanent membership. Going into the crucial vote, the Caribbean island had won the support of the group of Latin American countries. The Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Timothy Harris, sent his heartiest congratulations to the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Harris, who is the current chair of CARICOM, said small island developing states now have a champion. And Venezuela's foreign minister also tweeted his congratulations. There is no doubt, he said, that our America and the Caribbean will have a dignified representative to protect international peace and security. Prime Minister Gaston Brown congratulated Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves on St. Vincent and the Grenadines' election to the UN Security Council. He said St. Vincent and the Grenadines' election is a result of hard work and earned respect for your government under your leadership, and went on to say, I have every confidence that St. Vincent and the Grenadines will have a strong voice to the causes of small states in the Security Council, and that it will continue to uphold principled and objective positions on issues with which the Council will grapple. Meanwhile, next Tuesday has been declared a public holiday for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Dr. Ralph Gonsalves made the announcement during a radio interview following his country's win at the UN Security Council. Our correspondent Karina Cartagena has been following the vote at the United Nations.
In 2 rounds of voting today, the General Assembly elected Estonia, Niger, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Tunisia and Vietnam as non-permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations for 2-year terms spanning 2020-2021. It is the first time that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is elected to the UN Security Council, the UN most powerful body. St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves said this is an historic occasion and emphasized that his country hoped to work on addressing the security consequences of adverse climate change, among other concerns.
Talks between the United States and Mexico on migration and tariffs have started a 3rd day. There was still no agreement at the meeting on Thursday, and unless there is a breakthrough, President Donald Trump is promising to apply a 5% tariff on all Mexican imports from Monday. However, the Mexican foreign minister said there had been progress, with his government promising to step up migrant controls on its southern border with Guatemala.
The National Guard will be in the southeast of the country. They will be covering the whole country, but that will be prioritized. That's what we have established. Thank you. Tomorrow we will inform you on more. We have informed the United States that in Mexico we have set up the National Guard, that it is constitutionally legal, and the National Guard can cover regions in the southern border area. We have explained that there are 6,000 men and that they will be deployed there.
Meanwhile, agricultural producers in Mexico say the tariffs will have a disastrous impact on their business. The United States buys 78% of Mexican food exports, but they say consumers in the U.S. will also suffer.
What will happen when you place tariffs like Trump's? From first 5%, then 10%, and 15% all the way up to 25%. Is that these products will not enter to the United States at affordable prices. It will be U.S. consumers who end up paying more.
As President Trump steps up his threats against Mexico, the Democratic majority in the lower house of Congress this week passed legislation that would give permanent citizenship to over 2 million undocumented immigrants. It still has to go to the Senate, but the migrant population sees this as a historic achievement.
The lower house of Congress has passed the latest version of the DREAM Act, which would give 2.5 million migrants a path to U.S. citizenship.
Dreamers should be allowed to continue contributing to the growth of our country and have the opportunity to become citizens because they are in every sense U.S. citizens.
The Law of Development, Relief and Education for Alien Minors, DREAM, was passed on a final vote of 237 to 187, with 7 Republicans voting yes.
This is a result of the hard work of mobilizers all around the country. This is a result of all the sacrifices the people who are standing here made.
The law, though, is almost certain to die in the Republican-led Senate. But even if it is approved, the White House said on Monday that President Trump would veto the measure. The migrant community, however, will not be deterred. They vow to continue pushing for their demands to be heard, including calls to stop funding police forces in the border.
We will keep fighting to stop Trump from giving more funds to ICE and BP, for Democrats and Republicans to stop giving more power to these institutions, and to stop the deaths we have seen in the borders the last days. We're not going to stop the fight. We know there are 11 millions of undocumented people in this country. Today we take a step forward, and we are never going to forget the demands of this community.
But this growing debate surrounding migration policies in the U.S. does not end with the so-called Dreamers' Law.
We need permanent residency to be able to provide for our children and ensure their well-being.
There is much more behind this resurgence in migration policies under Trump. The situation involving foreign minors in the U.S. is in fact alarming. 6 children have lost their lives while in the custody of ICE. That's according to the country's Human Services and Health Department. So far this year, around 40,800 were taken into custody. In April alone, around 12,500 minors were detained in shelters. Additionally, Donald Trump's administration has cancelled English classes, recreational activities, and legal assistance for migrant minors who traveled alone.
We're now joined live by Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, from the UN headquarters in New York. Hello, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves.
Hello.
Tell us about... Dr. Ralph, tell us about the significance of St. Vincent securing a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council, becoming the smallest country to do so.
Well, it's a high honor to be the smallest country ever to sit on the Security Council. And we want to thank all the nations of GULAC, the group of Latin America and the Caribbean, those from Africa, from Asia Pacific, Western Europe and others, and Eastern Europe. We receive support from all over the world. And it is the result of our campaigning, the material which we put before our work at the United Nations and generally in the global system that generated confidence for people to vote for us.
Now, we understand that you've announced a holiday to be held next Tuesday in celebration. Is that one-off, or will this be a permanent commemoration?
No, that's a one-off holiday. And the day after, we are welcoming the President of Ghana to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He will address our parliament. We are building our links to Africa very carefully and strongly. We want to establish a permanent ABCD commission, Africa, Brazil, the Caribbean, and the diaspora.
Now, the UN Security Council is one of 6 principal organs of the United Nations charged with ensuring international peace and security. How would you say St. Vincent will use its position to advocate for peace in Venezuela and other countries which have been negatively affected by foreign blockades?
Well, we hold very sacred the fundamental principles in the Charter of the United Nations: equality of states, the peaceful settlement of disputes, non-intervention and non-interference in internal affairs, the terms of sovereignty and independence. All these things we hold to be sacrosanct. And we would apply these principles to factual situations. And in addition to the Charter of the United Nations and all the principles therein, that we would also like to advance the security agenda arising from the consequences of climate change. So these are important issues for us.
And one last question, Dr. Gonzalez. What will be some of your other priorities on the Security Council?
Well, I mentioned the issue of security consequences of climate change, the matter of fighting terrorism, the matter of settling a number of disputes which we have around the world peacefully, the problems in Venezuela, problems in Yemen, in the Middle East. All these are matters which we have a perspective to bring to bear. And we are not aligned to any big power. So we believe that we will be in a situation to dispassionately address these matters in the interest of humanity.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule today amid celebrations. We've been speaking to Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We'll now take a short break. Join us in a few. Welcome back. Colombian President Iván Duque has finally signed the Special Jurisdiction for Peace into law, a central pillar of the peace agreement with the FARC rebels. Duque signed the law on transitional justice after the Constitutional Court ratified the rejection by Congress of the president's objections to the law. However, the government has indicated it may seek to push through reforms in line with the president's objections. Our correspondent in Bogota, Jose Manuel Jimenez, has the details.
Indeed, President Ivan Duque has now signed the statutory law on the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, or JEP, which completes the legislative framework for implementing the system of transitional justice, which was a central part of the peace agreement signed in Havana. This gives legal guarantees to the more than 11,000 people who have presented themselves to the JEP in the last 2 years. This law is fundamental for the peace process because it gives those guarantees to the members of the FARC, but also to those members of the security forces who have applied to the JEP. Almost 2,000 of them so far. So after 2.5 years of back and forth, this law is now in place. We should remember that this law has been under constant attack by the governing Democratic Center Party and by the former president, Álvaro Uribe. He himself said on Thursday that the JEP should be replaced by a special chamber in the Supreme Court. So we can expect the debate to go on with fresh attempts to undermine or replace this peace mechanism.
Let's go to Venezuela now, where more than 100 local authorities from around Latin America are meeting to promote more participatory forms of local government.
It is fitting that the meeting is taking place here, in the Hall of Social Heroes in Venezuela's Foreign Ministry, surrounded by pictures of Latin America's greatest fighters for independence.
It had to be here in Caracas, in Venezuela, at a time when we are subjected to the most savage attack by those who want to take power away from the people, by those who want to ensure that the elites and the bourgeoisie keep political and economic power to themselves and deny power to the people and the organized communities. That is the big challenge we have now.
There are more than 100 Latin American local authorities taking part in this first meeting of local governments and participatory democracy to share their own experience and, of course, to learn from Venezuela's resistance.
There is a lot here we are not used to. For example, I was amazed that on the long drive from the airport to the hotel, there were no paid tolls. So we are going to learn more than we give. From the experience of change in Venezuela, the eliminations of illiteracy, the supply of clean drinking water. In our country, you have to pay for everything, however poor you are.
We think the lessons from this meeting will be hugely useful for us because we need to keep pushing to change our countries with the support of the people.
The meeting has a packed agenda and will continue until this Sunday. A wide range of different versions of local participatory democracy will be discussed, including those of traditional, indigenous self-government.
Every community and every nation has its own particularities, but the problems that face us are similar. As ancestral authorities in Guatemala, we have a vision of changing the country from the grassroots communities upwards.
Some of the most excluded sectors of society are playing an active part in this event, seeking to defend and extend forms of people's power.
We are
sharing a lot with the women here. We have many similarities. Not just Maya women like us. All the women have had a struggle. It is just that for us. Because of our history and economic reality, our struggle has cost us a bit more.
It is precisely this exchange of experiences that helps to build the strength of popular power and spread it more widely.
Now our correspondent Paola Dragnik, who is in Caracas, has the details.
The meeting of local governments and participatory democracy continues here in Caracas. And behind me is the table that analyzes issues which affect local governments, such as how to address neoliberal policies that are transforming some parts of the region. We have heard from mayors and representatives from Brazil, for example, who lamented that the link between local governments, unions and workers have deteriorated, posing a real challenge. Meanwhile, Bolivia shared what it deems as the successful formation of unions and collectives across the country. Many countries have taken note of this achievement, and that's the goal of this meeting, to share ideas, experiences, and learn. And what are the common issues? Groups face challenges in participatory financing, as well as the purchase of goods and services, especially locally produced. This was a common sentiment expressed at the tables.
We'll take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. Ethiopia's Prime Minister has begun mediation talks in Sudan with military and opposition leaders. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has met with the head of the military council that has ruled Sudan since leader Omar al-Bashir was overthrown in a coup in April. Mediation efforts come one day after the African Union suspended Sudan until the establishment of a civilian rule. This comes in the wake of a bloody crackdown on protesters, which saw at least 60 people killed. Meanwhile, the United Nations wants to send a human rights team to Sudan. This as the UN expressed grave concern about the situation in Sudan, saying it has proposed sending a human rights monitoring team and urges that an investigation is launched into the use of excessive force. The UN says those responsible for the killings and violence in Sudan must be held accountable. To understand the situation a little better, we spoke with Dr. Awal Allo at Keele University in the UK, specializing in law and East African politics. Here's what he had to say.
Sudan and Ethiopia had long-standing relationship. Sudan, at the moment is going through a difficult period. Countries like Ethiopia, who have a significant interest in events in Sudan, have been watching from distance. But Ethiopia is now intervening because it is the only country at the moment that has the credibility, the legitimacy, and the political ways to bring the two sides together. If you look at all the other countries in the region, from Egypt to Saudi Arabia and UAE, they have already intervened in the conflict on one side or the other. So Ethiopia is seen as a neutral, impartial arbiter who has the opportunity, the chance to bring the various actors together. I think there are a number of countries that have considerable interest in Sudan. So from Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Turkey, and African countries such as Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea. All of these countries, one way or another, have a significant interest in what happens in Sudan. There are some countries that are economically powerful, such as Saudi and the UAE, who are supporting the government, particularly the Transitional Military Council. But there are others who are not particularly keen on the ways in which the Transitional Military Council is handling the situation. So the African Union is a very clear example. Yesterday sent a very powerful statement that it cannot tolerate continued exercise of power by the military council.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telestarenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telestar English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.